My son's new bride looked me straight in the eye in the middle of our old living room and said, "You don't fit our family image." Okay. I'm a teacher making $2,847 a month, driving a beat-up 2012 Civic. But in the drawer next to me is the prenuptial agreement she signed, with a clause she didn't bother to read, and an investment portfolio I've been quietly cultivating for 20 years. That's enough to change the meaning of poor. If you want to know how one insult can set off a chain of dominoes from engagement parties to awards night, to the flip-flopping on the definition of success, come with me. Tonight, the rejected will send the bill for the most expensive lesson of someone's life. I'm David Williams, and those were the exact words my son's brand new bride said to my face. Ashley Johnson had just come back from a hush-hush Vegas ceremony, holding up a 3-carat ring I knew my son Ethan couldn't possibly afford. She stood in the middle of my modest living room scuffed sofa, a crooked frame of Ethan in a soccer jersey, bookcases that have moved with me more times than I care to admit, while her designer heels clicked against the 20-year-old oak boards. She delivered the news like a weather report, cool and precise, as if the forecast for my family were simply partly condescending with a chance of exile. "Ethan doesn't need some broke teacher dragging down our new life," she went on, admiring her glossy gel manicure. "We've talked about it. You're just not the image we're going for." I didn't answer. I set my coffee cup onto the saucer and let the porcelain say clink for me. The house was so quiet I could hear the wall clock tick off each second, steady as a metronome. Ashley's phone lit up with a lock screen photo from the chapel neon hearts, hurried smiles, a bouquet that looked rented by the hour. The ring kept throwing little knife points of light under my cheap ceiling bulb, and her charm bracelet chimed every time she flicked her wrist, like applause for her own performance. What Ashley didn't know, what she hadn't bothered to read while she scrolled and signed, was that the prenup she'd rushed through contained a small, deliberate clause about respecting family sacrifice. One line, one guardrail, the kind people overlook until they crash into it. And there was something else she couldn't see. The quiet thing I never led with, never bragged about, never needed to. My investment portfolio, $31 million built over 2 decades of patience and discipline, was about to teach her the most expensive lesson of her very entitled life. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me which state you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Because sometimes the loudest mistake you can make is underestimating the quiet man in the corner, especially when the fine print is on his side. Let me show you exactly how Ashley Johnson framed me from day one. I'm 56, living in a 3-bedroom house I bought in 2008 for $185,000, a small front yard with 2 rose bushes, a porch step still streaked with the paint I brushed on last summer, bookcases bowed under lesson plans. On the fridge, a Roosevelt High magnet pins a faded utility bill next to a thank you card from a parent. By the door sit the shoes I polish every Sunday and a canvas briefcase with frayed handles that's followed me from classroom to classroom. I drive a 2012 Honda Civic with 190,000 miles on the odometer. The key fob's plastic is worn smooth, and there's a ring of coffee on the driver's seat from a winter I can't quite place. Every morning the radio snaps to the same news station without my asking. 10 years of habit is hard to argue with. I teach United States history at Roosevelt High School. After taxes, insurance, and union dues, my monthly take-home is $2,847. On my desk, a stack of essays, a nicked wooden ruler, a stainless steel thermos that's lost most of its shine, and a pay stub with the ink going soft at the edges. Ashley's eyes skimmed these 4 facts: age, house, car, paycheck, like a scanner that stops for nothing, not even the chipped frame of Ethan's graduation photo. She arched an eyebrow at the key hook, let a tight smile pass over the utility bill, and filed her verdict with the efficiency of someone curating a feed. I was everything to avoid in Ethan's future. In her ledger, I was a cost center that ruined the aesthetic. In her album, the crease in a wedding picture that needed to be photoshopped out. What she didn't register were the small counterweights, a scuffed Teacher of the Year plaque leaning against a stack of textbooks, A toy Civic a student once gave me as a joke, a glass lunchbox cooling on the counter because I always stay late for kids who need help. To Ashley, I wasn't a father who chose time over titles. I was a filter one tap and her life would look more upscale. And with that, she decided I was everything wrong with Ethan's world. The first warning flare went up at Christmas dinner in Westchester, in Robert and Susan Johnson's gleaming house where the walnut banister wore a wreath and the fireplace snapped like it had perfect timing. Carol music drifted in from the living room. I was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, rinsing plates under warm water, when I heard Ashley Johnson's voice carry from the pantry, FaceTime on speaker, casual and careless in the way people get when they think the help is just family. I mean, Ethan's dad is just a broke teacher in some tiny house, she told her old college roommate. What he makes in a whole year wouldn't cover what I spend on bags. I set the stack of cranberry-streaked plates into the sink and counted 1, 2, 3, until the words stopped burning. The dishwasher door thudded shut with a soft seal. I pressed the quick wash button like it might rinse the moment clean. On the marble island, a napkin lay with a wine-red comet of Cabernet. In the next room, a Steinway sat open beside a frame of Aspen ski photos, and neat towers of Saks Fifth Avenue boxes turned the foyer into a gift catalog. Ashley wasn't wrong about the arithmetic. Her Hermes collection likely costs more than what I bring home in a year, but numbers were the only language she spoke that night. What she couldn't tally were the late evenings I stayed to coach a student through an application essay, the lunches I skipped to find a kid a textbook, the quiet ways a life accrues meaning when it is spent, deliberately, on other people. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and caught my reflection in the oven door tie loosened, a touch of soap on the cuff, the same face I bring to a classroom every morning. From the pantry, Ashley laughed softly and said something about levels. I slipped my old ring, the one Ethan gave me for a birthday in middle school, off my finger so I wouldn't clench it. In that house of glass and gloss and perfect acoustics, the verdict was already filed. To Ashley, I wasn't a father who chose time over titles. I was a line item that ruined the aesthetic, and that was the first sign. The second sign wasn't accidental, it was scheduled. Starting 3 months before the wedding, Ashley Johnson rolled out a series of what she called family meetings about the ceremony, each one held at white tablecloth places, where the valet line curled around the block and the check arrived tucked into a black leather folio. Menus were embossed, candles smelled faintly of bergamot, and a single glass of Chardonnay cost $28, about a week of my groceries if I shopped carefully. Forks chimed against china. The card reader beeped its soft, approving tone whenever Ashley set down her metal black card. When Ethan suggested inviting me, Ashley waved a hand with a smile so polite it landed as contempt. "He won't be comfortable here," she said, eyes already back on the vendor list. "We're discussing real financial planning." She pressed her card to the terminal, as if that settled both the bill and the question of my relevance. On my phone, a calendar notification popped up that I wasn't meant to see family core, budget, vendor list, seating plan, immediate family only. My name did not appear on the invite. I sat through one of those dinners anyway, nursing water with a lemon wedge while the others compared tasting menus. I turned the breadbasket toward them, reread the menu I had no intention of ordering from, and folded my wallet shut in my jacket pocket, folded my answer with it. In Ashley's notebook, my name lived under the heading, "Not Pertinent." To her, I was a sideline spectator, out of bounds and off the scoreboard. The group texts pinged on Thursday night's family meeting, venue planning a neat little glow I never shared in. Ashley glanced at my shoes, then past me, scanning the room like a photographer hunting for a cleaner background, a more on-brand frame. I made a small pencil mark in the margin of my teacher's planner later that evening, noted systematic exclusion. Around that same time, Ashley's parents began insisting on a prenuptial agreement, just a precaution for both families, they said. Ethan agreed, and I didn't object. What they didn't realize was that I had a condition of my own, one quiet clause, that would turn their precaution into my protection. What Ashley didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that a decision I made 20 years ago had already defined nights like these. She had forgotten one variable in her equation. Once, I had walked away from an entire world, simply to stand exactly where I needed to be. In 2004, I was taking home $500,000 a year at Goldman Sachs' glass office, looking out toward the Hudson, Bloomberg screens washing the room in a soft green crawl that never slept, and six-figure bonuses dropping into my account like calendar reminders. My business cards were blind embossed, my coffee was Pret at 7:10 every morning, and the elevator chimed that same bright note on the way to the trading floor. On paper, it was momentum. In real life, it was speed without direction. Then came a Tuesday, 7:12 in the morning. On the refrigerator, a square of yellow paper. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." Ethan was barely 3, then still too small to understand why his mother's suitcase was missing, but old enough to remember the sound of the front door closing. The front door had just sighed shut. A taxi door clicked out on the street. Ethan's cereal bowl still held milk. He stood in the kitchen with his backpack on backward, brave and confused, waiting for me to be the adult who knew what to do. I turned the note over, hoping for another line. The back was blank. I had 48 hours, 2 days, and 1 sleepless night to answer the only question that mattered. What kind of man do I want to be in my son's life? Hour 6. HR asked about headcount for the next quarter. Hour 18. A recruiter emailed a list of full-time nannies, along with salaries that made me catch my breath. Hour 36. Ethan fell asleep on the couch in his soccer socks, cleats abandoned by the door. Hour 47. I moved an email from drafts to sent. Subject line, transition. My options were brutally simple. Option 1, hire a nanny and keep sprinting. KPI calls at midnight, red-eye flights, a childhood watched through calendar invites. Option 2, step off the track, trade the skyline for a hallway of lockers, and hold my son's hand through every parent-teacher night and every skinned knee. Nannies can swap shifts, fathers cannot. I chose Ethan without conditions, without footnotes. I set my company ID on my desk, signed the resignation in one stroke, and caught a streak of wet ink on my cuff. The next week I carried a cardboard box to the elevator, listened to that same bright chime, and walked out into air that felt colder and cleaner than I remembered. I applied to teach at Roosevelt High School. The faculty room smelled like chalk dust and copy toner. My new badge was plastic, my lesson plans were spiral-bound, and the bell at 3 o'clock became a promise home when my boy needed me. My thermos lost more paint each month, but it kept the coffee warm through last period. The snapshots from those years are small and perfect. I stood in the rain at the touchline, yelling myself hoarse when Ethan curved his first shot into the net. I sat on a folding chair at back-to-school night, waiting for his name to come up on the list. I rinsed gravel out of a scraped knee, blew cool air across the sting, dabbed on Neosporin, and sealed it with a superhero bandage. I learned the weight of a backpack when a kid is too tired to carry it, and the sound a front door makes when you are home on time. Every showing up was another signature on the only contract that mattered: fatherhood, no attorneys required. There was one thing I didn't surrender when I walked away from Wall Street: the instinct. My financial reflexes stayed with me like muscle memory. With the modest savings left after the divorce, I opened a low-fee brokerage account and set up automatic, monthly buys, small, regular orders that clicked through after school, the way a teacher grades papers in the quiet hour between dismissal and dusk. I taped 3 tickers to the bezel of my old laptop: AAPL, GOOG, TSLA, handwritten with a fading felt tip, and spent Saturday mornings at the public library, underlining annual reports with the same red pen I used on essays. I bought Apple in 2004, when the chorus said the iPod was a fad. I bought Google at the initial public offering while people smirked, another search engine. I bought Tesla in 2010, back when nightly business shows called it a toy car company. I wasn't buying hype. I was buying habits, tools people reached for every day, and the long, boring runway of technologies that compound quietly while everyone argues about them. I lived on a teacher's paycheck and sealed the portfolio with discipline. No trading for thrills, no just this once withdrawals, no victory laps. My brokerage app had price alerts, but I turned off push notifications. I checked positions on Sunday nights after lesson plans were done, then put the phone face down and went to bed. Ashley Johnson saw only the camouflage. She saw the $2,000 suit I'd kept from my banking days, 20 years old, but still clean in the shoulders, and decided it was all I had. She saw the simple Timex on my wrist, the crystal nicked, and concluded I couldn't afford better. She watched me clip coupons at the grocery store, slide a double coupon Tuesday voucher across the conveyor, count out change at the register, and she shook her head with a little smile meant for friends who weren't there. In her mind, frugality meant scarcity. She was half right. I was counting, but not coins. I counted quarters, not quarters of a dollar, but quarters of a year. I counted stock splits. I counted the years when compound growth outpaced casual mockery. While Ashley measured worth by the weight of a handbag, I measured it by time in the market, by dividends reinvested, by the number of Sundays I could ignore the noise and let the math work. My portfolio was a garden planted with patience. The only weed I pulled, relentlessly, was impatience itself. At night, my money went to work the late shift while I turned in early because a good teacher shows up rested, and a good investor shows up consistent. It broke open at their engagement party, in Robert and Susan Johnson's country club, the kind of room where chandeliers glitter hard enough to outshine bad manners. Servers skimmed past with trays of champagne. Ashley Johnson's 3-carat ring kept catching the light, scattering cold sparks across the linen. Our names were scrolled in glitter script on a welcome board by the foyer, like the evening itself had been lacquered for display. Ashley took the mic with a smile that photographed well. She talked about how eager she was to help Ethan rise above his starting point, how grateful she felt that he wouldn't repeat his father's habit of settling for less. She lifted her glass on the beat, pausing just long enough for the room to perform its approval. 200 people applauded. I kept my eyes on the plate and cut my prime rib into even slices, the knife tapping the china in a steady, almost metronomic tick, as if calm could be portioned out by the ounce. The juice crept toward the rim. I adjusted my napkin and refused to let my hands shake. When the clapping thinned, I looked across the room for my son. Ethan found me first. He squeezed my shoulder, gentle, apologetic. "Dad, you know she doesn't mean anything by it, right? She just wants what's best for our future." He stared at the tablecloth when he said it, drumming a small rhythm with his fingers, as if he could tap his way out of the moment. That was the instant I understood I had to act. Not to win an argument with Ashley, not to score a point under the chandeliers, but to pull my son back from a story someone else was writing for him. The danger wasn't Ashley's insults, it was watching Ethan start to believe them. He was forgetting that every sacrifice I made had his name on it. Words like hers bleed, slowly, like ink across a family photograph. If you don't stop the spread, the stain eats the faces. I set down the knife, folded the napkin once more, and made a decision. I didn't need to prove anything to Ashley. I needed to return to my son the true version of who we are. 3 weeks after the engagement party, Ethan stopped by my place. He stood in the middle of my small living room as if he were seeing it for the first time, the walls crowded with his childhood photos, the cap and gown shot from high school, and a constellation of blue ink thank you letters from students I'd taught over the years. Late afternoon light slipped through the thin curtains. Dust hung in the beam like slow snow. When he dropped onto my old sofa, the springs gave a polite squeak, and his car keys clicked in his palm to a nervous rhythm. "Dad," he began, eyes tracing the edge of the coffee table. "Ashley has been talking about our future. She thinks you might be happier somewhere smaller, you know, a place that's easier to manage for a single man." I set my mug on its saucer with care, letting the porcelain give the answer I wasn't ready to say aloud. "Somewhere smaller how? There's this really nice assisted living community about 30 minutes from here," he said, still not looking at me. Active seniors, planned activities. She says you could meet someone, start fresh. Assisted living, I repeated, tasting the words. At 56? The cup and saucer kissed again, click a stand-in for the sigh I swallowed. And the wedding? Ethan turned to the window. She's worried about photos. You know how social media is now. Her family has expectations about appearances. I nodded once. In that sentence, the shape of the plan revealed itself. This wasn't about excluding me from one day. It was a system, manage me, hide me, and eventually replace me with a father figure more aligned with the aesthetic of her circle. In Ashley's album, I had become a smudge to be edited out. If I stayed quiet, I would lose my son entirely, not through some grand confrontation, but through a slow, courteous strangling. Birthday dinners would soften into quick calls. Family pictures would arrive as texts with apologies about angles and lighting. Grandchildren would grow up knowing the other grandfather, from a couple of blurry frames and a polite footnote. I would become the sad anecdote Ethan dusted off at parties. My dad tried his best, but the financial piece? Secondary yet still real. Because when a story is successfully swapped out, values are not the only thing that gets distorted. Value does too. And if I let Ashley's version stand, it wouldn't just cost me a seat at a ceremony. It would rewrite my place in my own family's future. By then, my portfolio had crossed $31.2 million, a number grown by compounding and discipline, not luck. 2 decades of steady buys, dividends reinvested, and refusing to panic when markets bucked. I kept the core in businesses I understood, a narrow sleeve for growth, and a separate stack of files labeled philanthropy. The plan was simple and stubborn: lock Ethan's future in place and unlock doors for others. I pictured a scholarship for single parents, chasing degrees, transparent selection, mentoring attached, funds released in tranches tied to academic progress. Its spending capped at 4% a year, so the principle would endure. But if Ashley Johnson succeeded in sketching me as a failure, Ethan would never touch a cent. His pride would deadbolt every door. The money would sleep in its accounts while my son stayed up at night, paying for a lifestyle someone else storyboarded: house, car, parties, and photographs that cost more than the moments inside them. Worse, she was poisoning the aquifer for whoever came next. At the engagement party, by the dessert table, I heard her murmur to her sister, "Thank God any children we have will take after my side of the family. I'd hate for them to inherit Ethan's father's limitations. A bad story is acid leaking into a well. Given time, it clouds every glass." My future grandchildren would grow up thinking their grandfather was a cautionary caption, "Don't live like this." That night, after Ethan left, I sat at my desk under the amber cone of the lamp. 2 stacks faced each other across the blotter. 20 years of investment statements clipped into neat binders, and a shoebox of blue ink thank you notes from students whose names I can still recite. I sharpened a pencil and wrote one word on a legal pad plan, then slid it into the blue folder. My choice was plain: let Ashley's version harden into our family's truth, or take back the pen and show my son what success actually looks like. The prenup she had been so eager to sign, complete with a small, deliberate character clause about respecting family sacrifice, was the lever I needed. One line, one switch. Flip it, and the narrative would change phase. The confrontation happened at the threshold of the venue walkthrough. The double doors of Riverside Manor swung open, and the scent of polished wood and white flowers drifted out. A coordinator with a clipboard breezed past us, the seating chart speckled with little gold stickers. Riverside Manor was a Victorian estate whose Saturday rental alone cost $12,000. The grand ballroom was staged for 75 guests. Crystal chandeliers, hand-carved moldings, and floor-to-ceiling windows framing hedges trimmed with a ruler's honesty. A sample table stood dressed in white linen, menus embossed in blind type. In the corner, a corkboard labeled "Seating Plan" bristled with pins. Ashley Johnson arrived in a cream dress that likely outpriced my monthly pay. She rotated her wrist just so when she spoke, letting a 3-carat diamond catch the late afternoon light like a signal flare for status. "Perfect, isn't it, Dad?" Ethan asked, voice low, anxious for my read. Before I could answer, Ashley stepped between us, professional smile locked in. "David, I'm glad you could come. A few adjustments to the ceremony setup." She tapped the clipboard. "Front 2 rows are for immediate family, my parents, my siblings, and Ethan's important colleagues." "And me?" I asked. "Row 3, center seat, great sightline." Ethan's brow tightened. "Ashley, he's my father. He belongs in the first row. We talked about this, babe." Her tone turned airy. "It's about photos. The wedding party needs to look cohesive." She lowered her voice a notch, the way people do when they want to sound discreet while making sure you hear. "Let's be honest about economics. A Men's Warehouse suit doesn't photograph well next to my family's wardrobe." Silence spread across the polished floor. Ethan's gaze ping-ponged between us. I nodded once. "Anything else?" "Actually, yes." She flipped to another page. "We've settled on a no-gift policy. Monetary contributions only. It's more practical for couples at our level." She tasted the phrase "our level" like it was a vintage. A teacher's idea of an appropriate present might not align with our registry. Ethan started to object. "Ashley, that's realistic," she cut in. "Your dad makes $34,000 a year. My dress costs more than that." $34,164 after taxes," I said pleasantly. Her eyes flickered, surprised by the precision. "You've done your research on my finances. What else did you find?" "I know enough," she replied, wearing the certainty of someone who has never been told no. "You couldn't keep your wife. You've never owned a decent car. You live in a townhouse smaller than my parents' guest cottage." "Ashley," Ethan took a step toward her. But she was warming up now, the varnish slipping. "You gave up any chance at real success to play house with your son, and now you want to drag him down to your level." "And how exactly am I dragging him down?" I asked. "By making him feel guilty for improving his station. By stuffing his head with small-town values when he could be networking with people who matter, people with influence and resources, who can help him build something bigger than this." She gestured vaguely at me, as if I were a scuff on the parquet that needed buffing out. I breathed in, slow and even. "People who matter." I glanced around the ballroom. "What do you think I've built, Ashley?" "A modest life teaching other people's kids for poverty wages," she said, genuinely puzzled that this needed explanation. "In today's economy, that isn't success, it's survival." Ethan found his voice. "You can't talk to my dad like that." "I'm not being cruel, Ethan. I'm being honest about reality." She lifted her chin. "Your father made choices that led to a limited life. I don't want you making the same mistakes." "Limited," I repeated. "That's an interesting word. I call it focused." "Focused on what?" Her laugh rang sharp against the elegant room. "On raising a son who knows the difference between wealth and worth," I said. "On making sure he can tell a balance sheet from a moral compass." She rolled her eyes. "Please don't give me a Hallmark monologue about money not buying happiness." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said, evenly. "Money absolutely matters. The question is whether you understand what real money looks like." Something in my tone snagged her confidence. She hesitated a half-beat where even the air handler's hum seemed louder. Ethan stared at me as though he were meeting someone new. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ashley asked. I smiled for the first time that afternoon. "Nothing you need to worry about." I met her gaze, held it. "Yet." That night Ethan called. "Dad, what did you mean by real money?" Ashley asked about it all evening. I was in my study under the warm cone of the desk lamp, calculator clicking a dry little beep each time I rechecked a figure. Portfolio packets lay fanned across the oak like lesson plans. 20 years of Apple, Tesla, Amazon companies I had watched grow from a teacher's modest apartment back when Ashley was still in middle school. "People define wealth differently," I said. "But the way you said it like you know something she doesn't." "I know many things she doesn't, son. That happens when you've lived 56 years. I paused. He was right to hear a current running beneath my voice. The afternoon at the venue had settled a decision I'd wrestled with for months. Ashley needed to learn that assumptions have a price, and Ethan needed to understand what, exactly, his father had given up for him. Seed 1, the paper switch. 3 weeks earlier, at the law office where we finalized the prenup, Ashley insisted it was just paperwork, a standard safeguard for both families. She didn't know I had asked Ethan to request a small addition, a character clause. The language was simple. Persistent contempt toward a parent's sacrifice or family devotion would forfeit claims to marital assets. Ashley signed in one smooth motion, smiling as if it were a puppy adoption form. The attorney's finger tapped a tiny line near the bottom, forfeit upon persistent contempt, but she was already capping the pen. Who would object to devotion, after all? Seed 2, the woman with the latte. For the past year, once a month, I met Megan Hayes at the Starbucks near Roosevelt. To anyone watching, it looked like a teacher grabbing coffee with a neighborhood friend. Ethan had mentioned it in passing, and Ashley took note. "Your dad drinks a lot of coffee with that same woman," she teased him. "Should we be worried he's dating?" Ethan laughed it off, but I saw Ashley's curiosity coil. In her arithmetic, any woman willing to see a poor teacher must be equally desperate. It never occurred to her that Megan arrived in a BMW, wore a Cartier on her wrist, and worked in suits that cost more than my monthly take-home. When Ashley finally asked, "Who is that coffee lady?" Ethan shrugged. "A neighbor. Dad says she gives good advice." "About what?" "Life stuff." Ashley filed it away with the smugness of someone who thinks she understands people after 2 data points. She did not imagine that life stuff included rebalancing strategies, donor-advised funds, and tax-efficient giving. Seed 3, the dull ceremony that isn't. For 15 years, I have received an invitation to the Excellence in Teaching Awards. I've been nominated 7 times, won twice, and attended every ceremony. Ashley knew about these because Ethan would say things like, "Dad has another teacher thing tonight." Kind of boring, but he likes the recognition. What Ethan didn't know, what no one knew, was that those evenings were also fundraising galas. In the very ballroom where teachers accept plaques, silent auctions tick upward, a painting selling for $50,000, a vacation package closing at $30,000. I had sat in the cheap seats for years, watching donors raise their paddles for luxuries most households would call a year's salary. This year I did something different. I sent an anonymous contribution to the scholarship fund, $500,000, earmarked for students from single-parent homes pursuing a 4-year degree, with mentoring attached and disbursement paced to academic progress. The ceremony was scheduled for the following week. Ethan had finally agreed to attend one of my boring teacher things. Ashley would be there too. She never misses an opportunity to be seen at a charity function. What she didn't know was that she was about to see a version of her future father-in-law she hadn't accounted for, and that would change everything. The engagement party at the Westchester Country Club should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the night Ashley showed everyone exactly who she was. The place had all the trappings you'd expect. Deep buttoned leather chairs, oil portraits of long-gone members, white-gloved servers gliding between tables, and champagne priced higher than what I spend on a week of groceries. A gas fireplace murmured in the lounge. A calligraphed placard, "Ethan and Ashley," curled in flourishes at the entry. Ethan had insisted I come despite Ashley's very visible reluctance. "Dad, it's your engagement party too. These people should meet you." I put on my navy Brooks Brothers 20 years old and still a clean line and polished my plain Timex. At valet, my Honda idled between lacquered sedans and low sports cars. The attendant hesitated a beat before taking my key. I told him, "Leave the radio where it is," and he smiled. Cocktail hour went down easily enough. I traded small talk with Ashley's uncle about the club's new bunkers and chatted with a family friend, an administrator, about tuition rising faster than reason. But I could feel Ashley's eyes tracking me, logging every sentence, every laugh, as if she were building a case file. The moment arrived over dinner, right after the second bottle sighed open and her confidence crested. She rose at the head table, flute in hand, the 3-carat stone catching the chandelier. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying across the linened room. "Ethan and I are so grateful to have such wonderful people in our lives." Polite applause, practiced smiles. "As many of you know, we come from very different circumstances," she went on, and her gaze slid across the room until it found me. "I've been blessed with advantages not everyone gets," she said, letting the sentence dangle. A few chairs shifted. Robert and Susan Johnson exchanged a quick look. "But that contrast," she continued, "is what makes our love story beautiful. Ethan has taught me to appreciate simple things, to find joy in humble circumstances." She paused deliberately on humble, long enough that several heads turned toward me. Ethan reached for her hand under the table. "Amanda," he started, then caught himself, flushing red. It was the name of her college roommate, the one who'd just texted him earlier that evening about flight delays. "Ashley, maybe," he corrected quickly. She was only warming up. "Ethan's father, David, has shown me another way of living," she said, smile bright and winter cold. "What happens when someone chooses comfort over ambition, safety over success?" My jaw set. I kept slicing the prime rib into even bites. The knife kissed porcelain, one clear ring in a room that had gone suddenly attentive. "Some might call that stability," Ashley said, "but I think of it as finding one's level." She nodded toward me as if I were a diagram. "David found his as a high school teacher, in his little townhouse, with his little car, and there's nothing wrong with that." Now the dining room was perfectly still, save for my knife meeting china. "In fact, I'm grateful Ethan was raised with those modest values," she added. "It means he'll never take for granted what I can bring him: opportunities, relationships, the lifestyle he deserves but has never had." Across the table, Susan pressed her lips together. Robert stared at his plate and turned his fork twice to busy his hands. "I know some families worry about economic compatibility," Ashley went on, voice softening like velvet over glass. "But Ethan and I have talked about it a lot. He understands this relationship will lift him, will give him chances his father didn't have or didn't take." She sipped, appraising the room like a general reviewing a line. "Ethan won't have to live on a tiny salary in a lonely apartment. He won't have to explain to his kids why Dad couldn't make Mom happy. He won't have to apologize for mediocrity." Silence roared. Even her closest friends looked away. "Some people sacrifice for family," she concluded, raising her glass. "But the greatest gift Ethan can give our future children is to show them what real success looks like, not the kind you settle for, the kind you reach for." She tipped the rim of her flute in my direction. "So here's to David Williams, for raising a son humble enough to recognize opportunity when he sees it. And here's to Ethan, for being smart enough to take it." A few stray claps flickered and died brief as her smile. I set down my knife, dabbed the corner of my mouth with my napkin, and let the room remember which of us had stayed quiet the longest. I rose slowly, folding my napkin and setting it to the right of my plate. The chair legs whispered over the wood floor. Cutlery paused mid-air as I walked the center aisle toward the head table. Under the chandelier's warm wash, every face turned. Ashley's smile dipped a fraction as I stopped a single step from her. "Your speech was very polished," I said, keeping my voice even. "I meant every word," she replied, chin lifting a notch. "I know," I said. "That's what made it perfect." Her brows knit. "Perfect?" I turned to the room. "How many of you are parents?" About half the hands went up. "And how many of you have given up what you wanted so your children could have what they needed?" Nearly every hand stayed raised, no one eager to be the first to lower theirs. I let the quiet answer for them, sweeping my eyes along the tables until the stillness settled. "Then you understand," I said, looking back to Ashley, "that a parent's love isn't measured by a bank balance, a zip code, or the emblem on a hood. It's measured by what you are willing to give up and what you are willing to endure." I let the next line land gently. Even a public shaming from someone who confuses arrogance with intelligence. A single cough surfaced from a far corner. Linen rustled. Ashley's flute trembled just enough to frost the rim with bubbles. Her lips parted to answer. I raised one finger, polite, but final. "Next week," I said. "Ethan and I will be at the Excellence in Education Awards at the downtown Marriott, the boring teacher event you've heard so much about." I allowed myself the smallest smile. "Come with us. It might help. Adjust the lens." I stepped back, the chandelier light catching the silverware as it stilled again, and let the silence finish what I'd started. The awards night unfolded in the downtown Marriott's grand ballroom, 300 teachers, administrators, and education supporters filling round tables dressed in white linen, low hydrangea arrangements, and a warm wash of amber light. Place cards gleamed, programs were embossed, and bid paddles rested on chairs. From the stage, a mic checked 1, 2 over the soft clink of glassware. Ethan had on his sharpest suit, though his hands kept smoothing his tie the way they do when he's wound tight. He scanned for the exits, then offered a polite half-smile to the server topping off water. Ashley swept in beside us in a black evening gown that probably cost more than a month's salary for most of the room. The look on her face suggested she was doing charity simply by attending. A metallic clutch disappeared beneath the table. Her phone pulsed with light every time a notification arrived. "How long do things like this usually run?" she asked as we found our assigned seats near the back. "About 2 hours," I said. "Don't worry, the speeches are usually short." She tapped a fingernail against her glass, eyes drifting over the perimeter where the silent auction items lined the walls. Dinner for 2 gift certificates, weekend cabin getaways, canvases by local artists. Each display had a bid sheet clipped beside it, opening lines that read $120, $800. Ashley's mouth tightened by a millimeter. "Is that woman waving at you?" Ethan asked. I turned to see Megan Hayes threading through the crowd, charcoal suit, perfectly cut, steps quick and sure, nameplate, pin catching the light. She carried a slim folio and wore the composed expression of someone who has spent years in expensive rooms. "David," she said, and hugged me warmly. "I've been looking forward to tonight." "Megan," I said, then gestured to the table. "I want you to meet my son, Ethan, and his wife, Ashley. This is Megan Hayes, my financial advisor." The word advisor hit Ashley like cold water. Her smile brightened by force. The handshake landed a touch too firm. "An advisor?" she asked, tilting her head. "For what scale of portfolio are we talking about?" Megan's smile stayed professional, the kind that says plenty while giving nothing away. The Cartier on her wrist caught the chandelier. Her Louboutin heel clicked once against the floor. "David prefers to keep his business private," she said smoothly. "What I can share is that the strategy is disciplined and long-term." Her eyes flicked just briefly toward the bid paddle resting on our table, as if to underline that even generosity works best when it's part of a plan. Ethan glanced at me with a silent "since when?" I gave him a small nod, long enough to know the rhythm. Around us, teachers chatted with local business leaders. Nothing about the evening screamed wealth or status, but the room carried a quiet gravity, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. Ashley's earlier air of condescension thinned under the ballroom lights, as if a layer of fog had lifted just enough for her to notice the shapes underneath. Before Ashley could pry for more, the house lights softened. Principal Harris stepped to the lectern. The microphone crackled once and settled. Music faded. A pale sweep of spotlight drifted across the room and came to rest on the stage. The evening moved through its familiar cadence. Plaques for classroom innovation, applause for student mentorship, nods for community service. Cameras flashed politely, programs rustled. Across the table, Ashley scrolled her phone, the glow washing her features with a bored, bluish light. Then Harris returned to the mic, voice slower now, consonants landing with care. "Tonight, we also recognize something rarer," he said. "For 20 years, this person has excelled in the classroom and has strengthened education in ways most never see." Nearby conversations thinned. Even Ashley looked up. Quietly, without fanfare, this individual has directed more than $3,800,000 over the past decade into scholarships, classroom resources, building improvements, and technology initiatives," Harris continued. "They have funded 47 full college scholarships for students from single-parent homes and underwritten books, supplies even basic necessities without attaching a name." A hush spread like ink in water. I felt Ethan sit taller beside me, as if something in the air had changed pressure. "And so," Harris said, sweeping the room with his gaze, "the inaugural Lifetime Achievement in Educational Philanthropy goes to Mr. David Williams." Applause broke like surf, immediate, sustained. Ethan's mouth fell open. Ashley blinked, once, twice, the practiced poise slipping an inch. I rose, smoothed the knot of my old tie, 20 years faithful, and walked into the heat of the lights. "Thank you," I began, waiting while the clapping ebbed. "Let me clarify one thing at the start. Those dollars weren't charity. They were investments." A soft ripple of laughter, the curious kind. 20 years ago, I left an investment banking career," I said. "Some people thought I'd lost my mind walking away from $500,000 a year to take a job that paid $34,000. In the crowd, I found Ashley's face pale, still. "But here's what I learned about real wealth. It isn't what you accumulate, it's what you multiply. Every student I taught, every scholarship I funded, every opportunity I helped create, that's compound interest in its purest human form." More applause. I lifted a hand, and the room settled. "Those kids have become physicians and engineers, small business owners, and my favorite teachers. The support they received didn't stop with them. It continued to compound, one life into the next. That isn't just return on investment, that is legacy." I took a folded sheet from my pocket. "Since we're talking money, a few numbers," I said. 20 years of a teacher's salary, invested with discipline in companies I understood: Apple, Google, Tesla, Amazon. 20 years of compounding. Silence gathered bright, attentive. Camera shutters clicked like distant metronomes. "Current portfolio value," I said, $31,200,000. The gasp was audible, a collective intake that lifted the chandeliers. Ethan's water glass slipped and thudded against the cloth. Ashley's champagne flute kissed the floor and shattered into glittering shards. I went on, steady. "Every dollar grew while I graded essays at midnight, coached on Saturdays, and showed up again and again when my son needed me most." I refolded the paper and slipped it away. "Success doesn't live in your paycheck. It lives in the vision you stay faithful to." I let the line breathe. "I never stopped investing," I said at last. "I simply shifted the focus to the things that matter most." The applause went on, 5 full minutes that felt like a warm tide refusing to recede. When I finally returned to our table, the linen still trembled from the ovation, silverware not yet settled. Ethan swiped at the corners of his eyes and tried to laugh it off, but his voice caught. "Dad, I didn't know." "That's the point, son," I said softly. "Wealth shouts loudest when it's insecure. Real money doesn't need to speak." Across from us, Ashley stared at her hands. Cheeks flushed the deep, conflicted red of humiliation and anger. Then she looked up, and the lens inside her refocused. The business leaders at nearby tables nodding their respect. The silent auction items that now registered not as trophies, but as gestures. The way conversations shifted when people passed me. I watched her thumb worry the 3-carat stone until the finger blanched. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Ethan asked. "Because I wanted you to respect the person, not the number," I said. "To understand what your old man gave up, not what he happened to earn." Megan leaned in, voice professional but warm. David was strategic about all of it. The giving was structured, tax efficient, targeted to goals he actually believes in. Her fingertip tapped the edge of a slender folder, as if to underline that nothing about the last 2 decades had been accidental. I could see the gears turning behind Ashley's eyes fast, then faster, skipping from me to Ethan, to the paddles by the centerpiece, back to the stage. $31 million, she murmured, almost to herself. Give or take a few $100,000 depending on the close. Ethan turned. "And the prenup?" Color drained a shade from Ashley's face. Her jaw tightened. "The character clause," she said at last, barely above a whisper. "The part about persistent contempt for family sacrifice." No one spoke for a beat. The band rustled their sheet music. A server set down fresh water with exaggerated care. We didn't need to say the rest out loud. Somewhere inside the neat paragraphs of that agreement, a switch had just flipped. 3 days after the gala, we sat around a long glass table in a conference room overlooking Midtown. Condensation pooled beneath a crystal carafe. A retractable pen clicked, quick and nervous, like the pulse of someone out of breath. Ashley, Ethan, Robert, and Susan Johnson faced me. Across the table, Ryan Mitchell, the Johnsons' family attorney, unbuttoned his jacket and squared a yellow legal pad. Beside me, my counsel Grace Wong, a senior partner whose hourly rate could make a lesser lawyer blanch, opened her case file and set a thick binder between us. For 3 days Ashley had been in freefall, phoning lawyers, parents, and the handful of friends who knew someone, hunting a reassurance that wouldn't exist. The woman who had labeled me a failed single father was now confronting the fact that she'd married into a family worth north of $31 million, and that her own behavior might have severed her from all of it. "Let's skip the theatrics," Ryan said, impatience tucked neatly under his courthouse tone. "I've reviewed the prenup. I need to know precisely what we're facing." Grace slid the binder to the center. The agreement contains what we refer to as a character clause, standard protective language, shielding family assets from a spouse who shows persistent contempt for family relationships. "What constitutes contempt?" Robert asked. He had been mostly silent since learning my net worth, perhaps replaying every conversation we'd ever had. "In this case," Grace said evenly, "repeated derision of parental sacrifice, dismissal of family devotion, or denigration of a parent's contributions based on economic status." "That's ridiculously vague," Ashley snapped, shifting in her chair. "It's actually quite specific," I said, speaking for the first time. "And it's well documented." Grace clicked open a small USB drive. "We have video from the Westchester Country Club engagement party security footage provided by the event coordinator." She set another stack on the table. "And 12 witness statements describing Miss Johnson's remarks as deliberately cruel and publicly humiliating." "That line was taken out of context," Ashley said, color draining. "The clip runs 6 minutes and 42 seconds, Grace replied, neutral as a notary. "We've corrected the auto captions." Ryan's pen skated faster. "Financial implications if the clause is triggered." "Upon activation," Grace said, "the violating spouse forfeits all rights to marital property acquired during the marriage, including appreciation of premarital assets." "In plain English?" Robert asked. "In plain English," I said quietly. "Ashley's legal access would be limited to whatever Ethan owns independently, currently his car and about $8,000 in savings." The room went taut and silent. "And the investments?" Ashley whispered. "The $31 million? Those assets sit in trust for Ethan," Grace said. "Spendthrift protections apply. If the character clause is triggered, the assets remain with the Williams family. The violating spouse has no access." Ryan cleared his throat. "Can we discuss remediation? Some pathway that satisfies all parties?" I turned to Ethan, who finally lifted his eyes to mine. "What do you think, son?" He drew a steadying breath. "Dad, I'm ashamed of how Ashley treated you. I should have stopped it." "You shouldn't have to," I said. "Respect is something adults choose to give. It's not something children are sent to fetch." Ashley found her voice. "David, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. Can we find a way through this?" "I appreciate the apology," I said. "But this isn't about how you feel. It's about protecting our family from people who confuse net worth with worth." Grace produced a single-page proposal. "Mr. Williams has prepared a settlement." She slid it across. Ryan scanned. His eyebrows climbed. "What does it say?" Ashley asked. Ryan read slowly. "You may remain married to Ethan, but you permanently waive any present or future claim to the Williams family trust assets. In exchange, Mr. Williams endows a separate fund of $500,000 as a wedding gift, yours, regardless of the marriage's outcome. $500,000? Ashley stared at the page. More than you've ever earned on your own, I said. Consider it tuition for a course in value. Ethan finally spoke up, voice rough. Ashley, you need to understand. My father didn't just walk away from Wall Street for me. He surrendered his pride again and again while people like you called him a failure when in reality he was building something remarkable. Susan broke her quiet. Ashley, you should take the offer, but the $31 million is not yours. Never was, Grace said, crisp as a gavel. And never will be. The character clause ensures that. I leaned forward. Two choices, Ashley. Sign this and leave with more money than most people see in a lifetime and a chance to rebuild your relationship with Ethan on honest terms. Or lawyer up and end with legal bills and nothing else. Ryan paged through the exhibits. Mrs. Williams, I must advise you the clause is ironclad. We could spend years litigating and still lose. What about the house? Ashley asked, voice thinning. The one we were about to buy? How much is the deposit? Ethan asked gently, then shook his head. Ashley, I make $42,000 a year. You've never worked. We'd be living on wedding envelopes and wishful thinking. Reality arrived like cold air under a door. Ashley had built an identity on marrying into money, on the lifestyle she was sure she deserved. Instead, she had married a marketing coordinator with modest savings and a father she had spent months humiliating in public. If I sign, she said, what happens to us? That depends on whether you can love a person for who he is, Ethan said, and not for what he has. But I thought we both wanted more than this, Ashley pleaded. More than what? Ethan asked. More than a father who traded millions to raise his son. More than a man who quietly donated nearly $4 million to educate other people's kids. More than someone who built real wealth while living like he had nothing, because character mattered more than optics? Ashley began to cry, not the tears of repentance, but the tears of a player realizing she never understood the rules. I need time to think, she whispered. 24 hours, Grace said, closing the binder with a soft, decisive thud. After that, we activate the character clause, and you walk away with nothing. We left the law office without a word, side by side, our footsteps echoing through the concrete throat of the garage. Fluorescent lights flickered, the air tasted of damp cement and warm exhaust. Ethan loosened his tie and unfastened the top button of his jacket. I thumbed the fob. My Honda chirped once, polite as ever. Parked nose to nose with it sat Ashley's BMW Paint, beating the last of an old rain. Chrome winking under the harsh lights. Two cars. Two definitions of the same word people love to misuse. Dad, Ethan said quietly, eyes on the oil-sheened floor, I need you to know something. Even before I knew anything about the money, I was proud of what you chose. I'm proud that you chose me. I set a hand on his shoulder. I didn't choose you instead of success, son. I chose you as my definition of success. We rested against the bumpers, letting the hum of the garage fans fill the spaces our voices didn't need to. Somewhere up the ramp a starter motor whined, then caught. On my windshield, the folded parking stub fluttered in the draft, small proof of a life spent paying attention to what matters. Money is fuel, I added after a beat. You're the journey. Ethan nodded, jaw set, and for the first time in a long while, we were measuring by the same yardstick. That night, Ashley told Ethan she was staying at her parents' place to think. I already knew the decision was made. Some people, when pressed between love and money, will always choose money even after it has slipped from their hands. The next afternoon at 4:47, she walked into the law office in oversized designer sunglasses, skimmed her signature across a stack of pages without reading them, and walked out with a check for $500,000 more than she had ever possessed on her own. The real aftershock, however, was only beginning. News of the Educator Excellence Award outran her ability to spin it. A 2-minute clip of my speech ricocheted across social feeds. By Thursday morning, number Teacher Millionaire sat near the top of the trends. Local stations ran the segment. a high school teacher with a quiet portfolio worth $31 million built on Apple and Google. Reporters interviewed former students who remembered me staying late to comb through scholarship applications and paying for textbooks when a parent couldn't. Ashley's trust fund circle, the same friends who'd sipped champagne at that engagement party, saw everything. They remembered her speech about my modest circumstances, now spliced side by side with headlines about anonymous philanthropy. Wednesday evening, Ethan called, tight-voiced. "Dad, Ashley's friends are posting screenshots of the articles on Instagram with captions like, 'When you mock a millionaire philanthropist because you thought he was broke.' How's she handling it?" "Not well. Her phone won't stop. Reporters want quotes. College friends are asking if it's true. Her sorority sisters are congratulating her for marrying for money without realizing she just signed away any access to it." The irony was surgical. Ashley had spent months fretting that my Honda and my small house might smudge her social sheen. Now she was getting a masterclass in what public humiliation actually feels like. The story crested when Forbes called Thursday morning. "Mr. Williams, this is Emily Chen from Forbes. We're running a feature on non-traditional wealth creation, and your story has our attention. Would you be open to an interview?" I declined politely. Somehow, word of the call leaked, maybe through an assistant, and by Friday morning, Ashley was fielding requests from acquaintances asking whether she could arrange an introduction to her millionaire father-in-law. The wedding set for next month quietly collapsed. Robert and Susan Johnson had invited 200 guests to what they imagined would be a social upgrade. Now they were left explaining that their daughter had publicly disparaged a man whose net worth exceeded their families combined. When journalists began showing up at Roosevelt High, I issued a single statement through the school: education is the only investment that guarantees lifelong dividends. Then I turned off my phone, went back to class, and graded essays until sunset. Some stories don't need interviews, the truth speaks for itself. Vendors called about deposits, the venue asked about new dates, the dressmaker inquired about the final fitting. "We need to postpone," Ashley told Ethan during one of their increasingly strained calls. "I can't face everyone right now." The most important aftershock was Ethan himself. For 23 years, my son had seen me through Ashley's lens, a kind man who made small choices and therefore lived a small life. Now he was replaying every memory, every conversation, every moment when I let a slight pass instead of defending myself. Saturday morning, he showed up at my door with coffee and bagels. Sunlight slanted through the striped curtains. The kettle clicked dry as I set it back on the stove. He set the paper bag on the little kitchen table and eased the lid off his cup, steam fogging his glasses. "I've been thinking," he said as we Saturday, "about everything. Like when you helped me with college apps and I complained we couldn't afford the good schools. You just said, 'We'll figure it out.' We did figure it out, but, in theory, you could have written a check to Harvard and never felt the hit." I sipped my coffee. "Would that have been better for you?" He hesitated. "I used to think so. But I earned a full scholarship. I fought for my grades. I value what I have because I know what it cost." He exhaled, the truth settling. "That's the point. Ashley has never had to earn anything. Her parents hand her everything, so nothing has value to her, not even people." This was the conversation I'd hoped to hear for 20 years. "Ethan," I said, "here's what I learned on Wall Street. Heirs often inherit the worst traits of wealth: entitlement, arrogance, the belief that money equals worth. I did not want that for you." He nodded, then looked up. "And the investment's $31 million. When were you going to tell me?" I pulled a folder from the sideboard, the one I'd prepared weeks ago. Tabs read, "Trust, distribution, rules, conditions. This is the structure. You cannot touch principal until you're 35. The income can fund education, a business, a home, down payment, anything that builds a life rather than just buys one. Think of it as scaffolding, not a hammock." He read in silence, his face growing more focused. "There are conditions." "Yes," I said. "No drugs, no gambling, no bankrolling anyone who treats family with contempt. And you must earn at least $30,000 a year by your own work. I am not raising a trust fund baby even accidentally." He traced the underlines with his thumb. So the money works, but I still have to work. Exactly. Money is fuel, I said, resting a hand on his shoulder. You are the journey. What about Ashley? The question was one I dreaded and, in a way, hoped Ethan would finally ask. That's your decision, son, I said, slow and even. But ask yourself this. When she thought I was poor, she treated me with contempt. Now that she knows I'm wealthy, she wants back in. Does she love a person or a wallet? Afternoon light slid across the sink. The kitchen clock clicked past the hour. Ethan stared through the window for a long beat, rolling a paper cup between his palms until the logo scuffed off. It tells me she never loved me for who I am, he said quietly. She loved the version of me she imagined I could become. That afternoon, he pulled up her name, pressed call, and kept his voice steady. I'd like to meet and get the ring back. No discussion necessary. They met in the lobby of an apartment building. Ashley placed the ring in his open hand, the metal colder than her perfunctory good luck. Ethan closed the little box. The click was small, final, and louder than any argument we could have had. I didn't comfort him or congratulate him. I just stood beside my son, noticing he was already standing a fraction taller. 6 months later, Ethan moved back into my house while he figured out his next steps. Ashley had taken the $500,000 settlement and flown to Los Angeles, where no one knew about her short, spectacularly ill-fated marriage to a man whose father taught high school. Her Instagram had added exactly one photo since, a Malibu beach at golden hour, captioned, "New beginnings. No wedding ring anywhere in frame." We were in my study that afternoon, surrounded by 20 years of investment binders and thank you letters from former students, paper proof of a life lived on purpose. File tabs bristled with Post-its. The old Timex lay beside a calculator and a fountain pen. The room smelled faintly of paper and ink. "Dad," Ethan said, steady but tight, "I need the truth. Did you plan all of this? The prenup, the awards night, the way everything unfolded with Ashley?" I set the pen down and met his eyes. "I planned one thing, to protect our family's assets and values from anyone who disrespected them. That's it. Everything else, her behavior, her choices, her consequences, belongs to Ashley. But you knew she'd react badly once money was on the table." "I knew character shows under pressure," I said. "Everyone's does." He nodded slowly, thumb tracing the worn edge of a file folder. "The strange part is, I'm not even angry at her anymore. I'm angry at myself for not seeing who she was." 23 is young to learn that, I said. "Most people don't see past the gloss until they've paid a few expensive tuitions." He exhaled a humorless laugh. "Expensive is right. This divorce is costing me $8,000 in legal fees." I smiled. "Then call it what it is, tuition for a critical life course. You're buying wisdom you'll use for the next 40 years. He looked around the room again, the binders, the letters, the quiet evidence, and his shoulders dropped half an inch, lighter than when he'd come in. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad you built the safeguards you did." "I built a fence," I answered, "not a trap." I tapped the nearest binder. "Fences keep the right things in and the wrong things out. Now we decide what we're building on the inside." In the months that followed, Ethan threw himself into the work with a focus I had never seen. He had always been bright. He had simply lacked a compass. Now he had both motivation and a clear picture of what real success looks like. Post-it notes began to colonize his desk. Compound interest, diversification, discipline. He quizzed me about long-horizon planning, not to touch my money but to build his own slowly, carefully, and without cutting ethical corners. "Dad, I've been thinking about teaching," he said one evening over dinner. "Teaching what?" "Financial literacy. For high schoolers, or adults who never learned how money actually works. A whole slice of Ashley's generation seems to think wealth lives in appearances instead of assets." For the first time in years I felt a particular kind of pride, the kind that arrives when your child chooses something good entirely on his own. "Then our timing is perfect," I said. "I've been considering an expansion to the scholarship program, adding a financial education arm. You mean workshops? Classes? I mean a foundation, I said. The Williams Family Fund for Financial Education, and you run the day-to-day. He stared at me. You're serious? Very. A real salary, real responsibility, and a real chance to help people avoid Ashley's mistake, confusing social optics with financial understanding. What kind of salary? Enough to live independently, save for your future, and start your own portfolio. You'll be compensated the way I always have been, by helping other people get free. That night, Ethan drafted a lean business plan for a youth financial literacy program. He titled it Money 101, Understand to Own. His first line of doctrine read, "Success isn't about how much you have, it's about how well you understand what you have." The outline sketched 6 modules: an emergency fund and the 50-30-20 budget, compound growth and discipline, credit traps and how to avoid them, low-cost index investing, ethics and temptation, and my favorite, family and values. 3 months later, we held our inaugural workshop in the same U.S. history classroom at Roosevelt High, where I had taught for 2 decades. 25 teenagers showed up, including a few former students wrestling with student loans and credit card balances. The whiteboard still wore faint marker ghosts. The old wall clock ticked steadily. A wooden yardstick leaned against the filing cabinet. Late sun flooded the mullioned windows. Ethan was a natural. He drew a clean compound interest curve on the board and wrote, $100 per month, discipline 20 years. He told the story of my Apple shares steady buys, no market timing, no panic selling, and then, more importantly, he taught them how to sort the difference between looking rich and becoming wealthy. What do you think rich wears? He asked. A few voices called out, watches, cars. And what does freedom wear? He said, smiling. An emergency fund, low debt, growing assets, and 8 hours of sleep. By the end, 3 students lingered to ask for a budget template. Another wanted to know how to call a bank to negotiate a lower card rate. I stood at the back of the room, listening to their questions and his patient answers, and felt that quiet, familiar pride take its seat beside me again. We hadn't just founded a fund. We had opened a door. The Q&A began. A handheld mic made its slow journey down the rows. Chairs scraped soft complaints against the floor. I stood at the back, shoulder to the window frame, while Ethan waited beside the whiteboard where the ghost of compound interest still hovered in pale marker. Next question? He asked. A young woman in a striped shirt raised her hand, eyes still on her notes. What's the single most important thing you learned from your father about money? Ethan paused, rolling the dry erase marker once between his fingers, then smiled. That real wealth is usually quiet, he said. It doesn't need to peacock or put anyone down. It just grows steadily when you keep your attention on what actually matters: family, character, contribution. He lifted his gaze and found me in the back. I gave the smallest nod. And the best investment you can ever make, he added, is in people, the ones who will remember your kindness long after they've forgotten your account balance. The room held still for a heartbeat, like a page about to turn. If you were in my place, Ethan said, lowering the mic, what would you do next? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you think Ashley Johnson learned anything from losing what she was so sure she already owned.